Amanda, welcome. How are you doing today?
Good. How are you?
I'm good, thanks. Good, real good. It's evening your time, right? So good evening to you.
Oh, thank you. Good morning. Yeah, I'm in Sydney, Australia, so it's evening here.
Awesome, awesome. Your accent is American, right?
It is American, yes. I grew up in the
Okay,
States.
right. Okay. I just wanted to. I had like an Australian twang in there somewhere, but I wasn't sure whether it's Australian American. Just thought to ask. Just thought to ask.
No, no. I I grew up in the States and then I've lived here since 2013. So I've lived here for a decade. So
Oh,
probably
okay.
have a bit of an odd sound.
Yeah, a mixture of American and Australian. Well, thank you so much
Mm.
for being on the podcast. I saw your profile on LinkedIn, and I thought you'll be a very interesting person to speak with about SEO. What I like to do is go through a number of topics, get into your background in SEO, technical implementation that you've experienced with clients, your experience with the client side and consultant dynamic. You also have an interesting take on keywords, I'm sure. So I'd love to get your take on a number of questions around keywords. And then we'll touch into AI, the SEO community as a whole, and also the year ahead for you. So to begin with, as I like to do with all my SEO guests, I like to ask them how they got started in SEO. So with that said, how did you get into the industry?
Yeah, so I think like a lot of people that have been in SEO for a while, I kind of fell into it. It was a bit of a fluke. So after I graduated uni, I taught English at a university in China. And then when I was coming back and looking for a job, I was like, okay, I want to be either where I grew up or the town where I went to uni, somewhere that was a familiar environment. And
Hmm.
the town that I went to uni in happened to have a job listing as for a copywriter at a marketing agency. So I applied and interviewed for that job while I was in Stockholm, actually, at in the kind of hostel like common area,
Hmm.
and came back to that position and I started copywriting. And this was at a point in time where SEO was all about exact match anchor text and inserting it very specifically into copy without it sounding super awkward. So the powers that be at the agency were kind of like, okay, you know how to write. Let's teach you SEO, because writing and writing well as a skill would take longer to learn and longer to teach someone than SEO. So they
Hmm.
figured they'd kill two birds with one stone and train me up in SEO and get someone to write this very kind of targeted copy for their clients. So I did that and then just kind of kept going. I have a background in English lit and business. So I kind of got pulled into solving puzzles and figuring out how to create strategies and make sense of everything for businesses on the internet. And that's just kind of exploded into a bunch of different things over the years. Like for a while when I was agency side, I was running a data and analytics offering and doing the implementation and setting up the Tableau and doing all of that, as well as talking about user experience and conversion rate optimization and that whole spiel as well. So to
Hmm.
answer your question in a very lengthy way, by chance, essentially, is how I got into the SEO industry.
That's how a lot of us get into the industry, especially those who've been in like for a number of years. It just sort of like happens. We sort of like we're drawn in via some means. It's rarely the traditional way of college,
Absolutely.
uni, and then SEO first job. So would you say you're more
Yeah.
of an a content person or off page, technical or analytical? Do you fall within a pillar, or do you just look at all of it?
So in terms of my day-to-day and what I typically do, it's much more kind of the on-site business strategy integration than it is the off-site. So I'm happy to advise on how to build links or kind of PR strategies or train up PR teams, that kind of implementation, but I am not a link builder. It's a very kind of like, you've got to have that very specific kind of personality to really enjoy link building. And it's never quite been my thing. So it's never been anything that I lent into. I can analyze backlink profiles, tell you whether or not it's toxic, kind of help you figure out tactics and elements of your business to leverage to get visibility kind of more broadly. But in terms of actually doing the emails and dear sir or madame,
the outreach,
that has never quite, that's never quite been my strongest skill set. So it's never been something that I've actively pursued. I've done it. I think everyone's done it kind of in the more junior points in time in their careers. But I don't think I've actually touched it, I want to say, for a decade. I think the last time I wrote an outreach email was probably 2013.
That was just after Penguin, right? Oh, around that period.
Yes. Yeah, because we were starting to, that was when we were kind of starting to have conversations around, we can't say anything that makes it seem like we're requiring a link.
Yeah.
So, yes.
I remember those.
Time, yeah.
I remember those days as well. It's I think link building is probably now best carried out by digital PR, especially the outreach part of it specifically. Me as a consultant, I always say when I speak with prospects that I cover all areas of SEO apart from outreach, because that is one area that I firmly believe SEO should have nothing to do with it, especially these days. I mean, it led to Penguin for one, and two, I think a lot of people know the value of links these days. So essentially the cost of it, if you're looking at it from an ROI point of view, the cost of links has literally skyrocketed throughout the time, and it takes a certain amount of nuance, I would say, to actually acquire a link or to land a link, that I think is best carried out by a PR person these days. So yeah, I totally feel you on that one. Now,
but in terms of everything else, go ahead.
No, go ahead, go for it.
But no, in terms of everything else, I write content, but I have a lot of technical experience as well. So anything kind of on site, I'll manage and figure out basically.
Okay, awesome. So in terms of implementation, I always find that this is an area that a lot of brands struggle with. So as an example, you have a content strategy, and you've spent a number of days, weeks on the strategy, and the client receives it, and it's a case of, oh, we actually have to implement this. And then for SEOs who are in-house, who work client-side, they have this monumental task of trying to get different departments to actually work on this strategy. And a lot of the times they get pushback from it. So it could take several weeks, if one is lucky, usually months, to actually have something implemented. In your experience, how long roughly would you say it takes a client to actually fully commit to implementing recommendations?
Yeah, so I'll speak from a bit of personal experience. When I was in-house at Optus, which was which is one of the biggest telcos in Australia, to get an article about a phone, which is a product, published the fastest that I was ever able to turn that around in terms of me actually writing it and then managing all of the different levels of approvals and then actually doing the publishing on the site myself. The fastest I was ever able to turn that around was 7 weeks.
Wow.
Yeah. And I had clients when I was agency side in Australia that were in also kind of very regulated industries. And it took them, I want to say 3 months generally to get content changes done on the website. But then I've also had clients that were in really regulated industries and were able to get it done in a couple of weeks. So I think for me, one of the biggest takeaways when I was in-house that I've taken to when I'm now a consultant is basically that I get to know as many kind of people involved in the process as I can. So like any approval that it needs to go through, like if it needs to go through a brand approval or a legal approval or whatever other layers of approval, I basically, my main point of contact, I'm like, hey, I need you to put me in touch with like your favorite legal person or your favorite brand person and have them give me basically the cliff notes, the like major do's and don'ts in terms of tone or language or things, so that there is a much more likely chance of there not being like 5.5 million back and forths. Because I think for a lot of consultants and for a lot of kind of external agencies, that is where a lot of the time is in the back and forth. So everything that you can do to minimize that is good in my book.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's an issue that I think a lot of SEOs can relate to, because all the work past the strategy really requires more than SEOs, right? You need the different departments, especially if you're in a heavily regulated industry. I've worked for a finance brand before, and the compliance process was just so. A lot of things were shut down, literally almost at the end, and it was compliance at the very end. So it was a case of actually having a look at the entire process, seeing actually, can we have compliance review things a bit earlier on? So we got to a point where we were actually incorporating compliance within the early briefing stages, just to ensure a smoother workflow. And these sort of things, I think a lot of business leaders, I should say, aren't necessarily aware of the process of what it takes to actually have SEO recommendations implemented, because at the end of the day, they just look at the bottom line and say SEO hasn't performed for us, and they almost give up on it, which is a shame, because it tends to lead to SEO hasn't performed and it's this SEO's fault that it hasn't performed. Let's find another SEO, and they continue that process for a while until they actually change things internally. And it's the internal issues, I think, that needs to be resolved in a lot of cases. Do you find that as well in your experience?
Yeah, it's not necessarily always internal politics or processes either. Sometimes it's just that you don't have the people. So for example, again, I'll use Optus as an example because it is the largest organization that I've worked with thus far. And so, for example, something like server-side rendering, which on paper is a single line recommendation, implement server-side rendering because it's the best practice. When it comes to actually trying to get that implemented right, we had an entire team of developers that were trained on React that would need to be retrained on Gatsby in order to implement server-side rendering, and the entire code base would have needed to be redeveloped in Gatsby, which would literally be a couple of years and probably millions of dollars to do. So that kind of context, sometimes when you're an external consultant or an external agency, can get lost. And even small stuff like, oh, can we put a new module on this page? Sometimes the answer is no, because we don't have a developer resource. We don't have a person available to do that thing, because we only have 5 AEM developers in our department, and they're all working on other business priorities. So we cannot take them away from those, or else we'll get the CEO on our butts. So sometimes it's even beyond kind of process or politics.
Yeah. In a situation like that where SEO priorities aren't even on the board, right? They aren't on the priority list at all. How do you go ahead and navigate something like that when you have a recommendation to actually implement?
I make friends with the teams that are actually going to be implementing it and doing the work, and basically talk to them and say like, hey, can we sneak this change in and test it on like 2 pages? Like legitimately, like, can we do like this really tiny proof of concept that isn't going to take up much of your time, that maybe you can slip in this sprint because something else fell through or whatever. So I'll do that. And then you have a case that's built up, right? And then from that perspective, you have ammo for your next financial year planning, where you can say, hey, we did this proof of concept. Based off of that, it could earn the business X amount of incremental revenue if we have Y budget. And I think that's something, again, that is really important with SEO, is that you need budget for it, even if it's the budget of internally allocated time and people. Like, I know for like budget planning and quarterly planning for Optus, you had to get into that planning early to even get your idea considered, because if all of the budget and if all of the tasks were in the sprint, right, they're already at probably 150% capacity. So it has to be cut from there, and then probably cut even again further. So you want to get into those conversations where they are talking about money and where they are talking about the business impact, and have something that speaks that language as well.
Yeah. And can you imagine the frustration businesses face, right, when they have all of these dynamics in place, and then an algorithm update happens and their organic traffic tanks, and then there is a whole shitstorm of issues to resolve, including SEO, something they'd pushed back many times over. SEO goes a lot more than just optimizing websites. I always say they're almost like 2 levels of optimization. First level is finding issues and then solving them, whether they be technical, on page, off page, what have you. A second level looks more into the dynamics of a business. It delves more into the people optimization, if that's a term. And that's almost like a level 2 that looks into a more preventative state.
Yeah, exactly. And it's future-proofing the operations of the business so that it integrates SEO practices. Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. As long as a business has a website and the website is acquisition-based, SEO is always something that they will need. In terms of implementing recommendations, what would you say a business leader should bear in mind when they invest in SEO?
Well, I think exactly kind of what we've been talking about, that it's not something that can be done in isolation, that it's not something where the SEO nerds in the back room in the basement can do, clomping away at their keyboards, right? It's something that requires a lot of coordination and requires actually quite a bit of a lot of other people's time.
What about, let's say, business leaders from an operational point of view? What would how can SEOs have departmental leaders on their side so they don't get pushback?
Find out what matters to them and figure out how to have those conversations in a way that reflects how SEO will help make their lives easier. So it's kind of exactly what we've been talking about, right? Where if you're concerned about having kind of a buttress against a random drop because of an algorithm change, right? It's okay, then let's integrate SEO quality checks into our QA testers' strategy so that they know and they can check if there's a robots no index, if there's any kind of other signals that maybe could be screwing with visibility, that there's more preventative work in place than there is reactive. Because when SEO isn't integrated into operations or integrated into process, by its very nature, it is reactive. Whereas if you have kind of those checks and balances in place from many different departments, then it is much more preventative and much more kind of forward future-proofing than it is reactive.
Yeah, totally agree. Proactive SEO, the earlier a business can get into that mindset of being proactive with their SEO, the better it is. The first year or two, I found it's usually very difficult for a business, but when you get into year 3, 4 plus, it's so, I mean, the return on investment just compounds after year 3. It's usually those first 2 years that's very chaotic. Now, I saw on your website you have an interesting take around keywords. So I want to delve into your view on keywords, because I think this will be very, very interesting to speak on. So why do people who talk about keywords make you want to flip a desk?
Because so for me it's a combination of things, right? Keywords, I think that specifically was a reference to keywords as like a success measure, right? Because the search results that I see and the search results that you see are very different search results. Like every search result is personalized, and that's something, if you go back through and look at all of Bill Slawski's analysis of all of Google's patents around kind of entity recognition and query mapping, that your search results are always informed by your previous search results. And so what you see based on a query, so if you're searching for like a horse, and you're an equestrian lover and all of your searches historically have been about equestrian and like all of that, you'll get equestrian based results if you search for horse. But if you're a carpenter and you search mostly for kind of carpentry tools and you've got your carpentry news and your industry la-di-da, like you would get the carpentry horse result in your results. So there's a lot of different variations in queries and how they work and how they rank. So, and it's funny that you bring that up, because I think I wrote that probably like 8 years ago. That's not something that I've actually updated in a long time. But I still love the XKCD comic. um, but it's, yeah. So that specifically about keywords as a ranking factor, it's just so personalized. It's a vanity metric. And I would much rather speak to a client about how their organic visibility is impacting their traffic. I don't care what keyword they use to get there. Not in that sense. But I care that it is increasing their revenue and we're getting kind of warm leads that way. Like, that's what I care about. So I'd rather have that conversation. And the other side of it is that Google themselves don't think really in keywords entity anymore. It's entities and it's natural language processing and it's queries as question and intent. And so that is all much more appropriate. So the example that I give, because I'm a nerd, right, is to kind of explain entities, right, and how that kind of affects ranking and visibility, and why just an individual keyword is not really what you want to target anymore, that you want to target the entity and the topic. Is I wouldn't think someone who wrote about New York City and never mentioned bagels or dollar pizza was worth their salt and had maybe never actually ever been to Manhattan. So it's kind of like that, where it's not just the thing in isolation anymore, which is also why, I mean, and we see it as well with the helpful content update, right? There were a lot of people at the beginning of December, after they did some analysis, they were saying like, oh, all of these location optimized service pages are starting to get you in trouble. And that is, to a certain extent, an incidence of focus on keywords over the intent of the query, right? Because if I'm looking for a local hot wings or like barbecue place in Sydney, I don't care if the page that I land on has Sydney written in it. I just want the information about if there's a location in this place, or how I get the barbecue, or how I get the hot wings. Like, I know I'm in Sydney. That is already kind of the context of my search. And so that kind of specific language is superfluous and unnecessary in terms of the actual query and the intent behind it, kind of. So yeah, that's keywords. I have a love-hate relationship with them.
I'm wondering, and I've been wondering for a number of years now, whether Google is slowly moving marketers, specifically SEOs, away from keywords. It's because Keyword Planner, for example, you know, it's changed. Keyword Planner is different to Keyword Tool that we know when we were coming up, right? The data set is very different. It's not as good, in my opinion. And when you have things like helpful content updates, and even the not having keywords visibility in Google Analytics anymore, these sort of like signs or indicators, if you like, are sort of like showing that Google wants marketers to move slowly away from the whole idea of focusing on keywords. Do you have the same thoughts around Google's take on keywords, or SEOs focusing on keywords?
Well, I mean, obviously to a certain extent, yes, because that's my personal stance is always much more topic based and intent focused than necessarily keyword based, because Google at the bottom of things is trying to replicate how a user experiences search. And the only reason that people don't type in full questions into Google is because they initially trained us not to. Right? They created the environment where we type in this weird, like, half English where it's like Nike shoes, London. Like, who actually like thinks and processes in that way? Like, if we just started a search engine from scratch today with the level of technology that we have, that wouldn't be how we use it. So I think just from a technology perspective, they're trying to push it in that direction. But then from a monetary perspective as well, I know from an AdWords perspective, they're pushing people away from exact match keywords. And that's a bit of a revenue play on Google's part. But I do think it's also, to a certain extent, a bit of a revenue play from the organic side as well, right? Because when you type in something that isn't a keyword, when you type in something that's more of a question, you are more likely to receive a rich result that gives you the answer immediately. And that keeps you on the search engine, which makes you more likely to see an ad and click on that or come back to it or have that influence. So yes, I do think generally they are moving away from the concept of keywords. And I'm not sure how long you've been in the industry, but to play at my age a little bit and my experience in the industry, I remember when we had not provided in Google Analytics and when that started, and the panic that me and my kind of coworker had about, what? We can't have that anymore? That's been what, like 12 years? 12 years, maybe a bit longer. So I generally think the whole kind of concept of keywords is on its way out. And part of that I do think is driven by technology and just the fact that they want to keep pushing how close to the user experience and the ideal experience they can get.
I think that's going in the next couple of years is going to ramp up very, very quicker. I think when not provided, the whole hoopla around that and the rhetoric about SEO being dead, being all around the internet, I thought to myself, I kind of saw the long-term vision of it, and I almost put myself in Google's position and thought, it makes sense. I mean, I do prefer having keywords because I miss those days when you could see the keywords, literally keywords and landing page, right? In Google and Analytics. But I thought to myself, it kind of makes sense. And I'm seeing now that a number of brands and SEO specifically are aiming to push business leaders to look less on keywords and more about pages rather than keywords. So the value now is slowly SEOs are trying to shift the value into pages. However, there's this huge psychological aspect that we still need to deal with, which you mentioned earlier, saying that keywords is a vanity metric. It's going to be an uphill battle to sway the business leader from looking at keywords and instead focusing on pages, because keywords keywords, links and rankings, that's pretty much the core of what a business leader knows and thinks that's all they need to consider. But now things are changing. They kind of need to shift away from that. How do you see that conversation going down?
Well, when I take on a client, if it's an ongoing engagement, most of my engagements are project based, but I will sometimes have ongoing engagements where either I'm working with them in their operations process to integrate SEO, or I'm working with them to implement the findings from the audit and find those compromises. If reporting is a part of that, and generally kind of the way that I have approached it historically is I start and sit down and do kind of a goal and target mapping with a client, and generally refuse to use rankings. I'll link it up to something further down the funnel, like revenue, leads, traffic, whatever it may be, something that is more tangibly and directly related to the product or the service offering, or to the internal language of value within the business. So like, or what, like white paper downloads or kind of micro conversions as well. Like, I'll line it up to those actions rather than keyword visibility. Like when I do forecasts, and historically when I've done forecasts, I have never done it based off of keyword improvements. I've always done it based off of overall organic traffic forecasting and then market influences. So I've always historically avoided using keywords for any kind of genuine goals or targets. So I'm just stubborn.
Awesome. That's awesome. It might be a case of we SEOs need to take a hard stance and say, okay, this is it. It's a cut off. We need to move away from keywords, and this is going to be the replacement. I'm looking forward to those sort of conversations, because I've been saying this for years, and I almost had SEOs look at me as it's an odd thing not to look at keywords, because there are many SEOs who also focus on keywords, right? But I was like, I've always had the mindset that keywords is something that we as SEOs should be shifting away from slowly, because it's changed, right?
And I found that sometimes, particularly at kind of larger business levels, right? They talk about brand awareness and kind of brand penetration, share of market, those kinds of things. So you can almost take them in that direction, and those kind of more top of funnel, more familiar metrics. Like, it's really easy to do kind of a share of market with your immediate competitors, just using something like Ahrefs or SEMrush. You can pull that particularly easily, and it will still give an indication of kind of progress over time, but it's a relative measure in immediate comparison with your competitors, rather than saying, oh, we rank number 4 for this random arbitrary keyword. So that's kind of a middle ground if you need that progression point.
Totally agree. Now, all of the changes happening in the SERPs, we're seeing a number of indicators that AI is very quickly amongst us. So ChatGPT, for example, I've been hands-on on it this week and playing around with it. Even had a Chrome plugin to see how the SERPs might change. And it's very interesting because a number of results, I had like a handful of result keywords that I searched for, including some Excel functions, and the AI response was actually better than what Google showed me. And I found it to be very fascinating, because it seems as though it's something that users are almost going to want to expect from Google. So Google will have to take action, and they already have, right? It's a top priority for them at the moment, according to a number of reports. With ChatGPT coming into popularity, how do you think Google is going to respond to AI?
Well, we've already kind of seen what their stance is on AI, right? That it's not anything useful, and that they're actively going to look to decrease its visibility in search results. So I think that that's going to continue, and until the chat models and the AI can add a level of randomization that reflects how a human might actually write and throw in just like random words or somewhat terrible grammar, you're always going to have a footprint. It's always going to be easy to see. It's like the PBN of writing, basically, right? So, and also, I was talking to someone earlier about this. AI it probably is going to be very difficult for it to come up with new ideas, right? Because it only knows what you feed it, so it can only kind of work off of those concepts. So that's the other side to it as well. I think it's going to be something that, until the technology progresses, is going to be really easy for Google to see the footprint of and be able to directly target. Personally,
I'm wondering whether Google is considering simply buying ChatGPT and just working to improve them based on what they have so far. I mean, as far as data set goes, they have it.
I was going to say, I feel like I did actually see something that there is a Google-powered version of an AI that is a very similar process. I can't remember where I saw it, but maybe.
It'll be a very simple killer business move from Google. As far as SEOs go, do you think AI generated content is a threat? As a writer, do you see ChatGPT as something that is that can kill SEOs who are very content focused?
No, I don't think so. I don't. I mean, again, it's that whole kind of Black Mirror, kind of strange reflection, right? It can only see the information that it's been fed and that it's learnt. New ideas will probably be difficult. So it'll, at least at this current state, I can't see an AI-powered piece of content getting to that kind of 10x point that as SEOs and marketers and business owners we aim for. There's not, and just the kind of emotive and psychological ability, I don't think will be there, honestly.
A number of clients that I have worked on, or worked with rather, they are looking at AI as something that could be very useful to them. And I can sort of like see their thought process being around, okay, we no longer need SEOs to do certain things because we're going to use AI. The issue I'm finding with that is these clients, and I'm sure it's going to be more than just the ones I personally know of, they may not necessarily have an SEO in place. So it'll be a non-SEO using a tool for SEO purposes. I take it from your expression, you're not a fan of that. Yeah. I had the same
I've
reaction.
seen too many instances. Yeah. No, I've seen too many instances. Like, I do some mentoring at some agencies, and I've already seen instances of information that a ChatGPT has pulled to answer a very kind of specific technical question. And I've been like, that is just flat out wrong. Like, they've pulled that from some random dark forum, some random comment where if you actually read the context, people are just like, no, what the fuck are you talking about? Excuse my language.
That's okay.
I can re-record that if you want.
That's okay. Go for it.
So no, there's too many, when the information isn't vetted, there's just too much information out there on the internet for it to be any guarantee of being accurate, which is the same conundrum that we always run into with SEO and clients who don't know what they don't know, where they'll go onto the internet and find the answer that they want to see and not necessarily the correct one, because someone out there wrote an article about what they want to hear that isn't actually correct for their situation.
Yeah, it's going to lead into more issues. I think it's on one hand, it's I feel for clients. On the other hand, it's like I'm looking at it from a consultant point of view, and I'm like, it's good for our business. Let's move on into SEO community. How has SEO evolved since you started? And do you think it's evolved for the better?
I mean, it's always going to be yes and no, right? So when I started in SEO and kind of throughout, I've been very lucky in that I have felt confident and comfortable enough to reach out to some people that I really admire and actually get their unfiltered answers and actually get their genuine opinions, whether that's just banter at a conference or a message over LinkedIn or a random email one day, just like shooting it out into the blue and being like, hey, maybe you'll answer this. And I've been really fortunate in that way, in that I've always had really good experiences, and I'm a part of Arija's Women in Tech SEO community as well. So that's a gorgeous and glorious place if you're female or gender presenting as female. I entirely recommend it. It's a fantastic community. That being said, there's always going to be the snake oil salesman, the people that just pull the rug out from under you and do the bare minimum and burn you. But I think generally business owners are getting more mature about what SEO is, and good SEOs are getting more vocal about what crap SEO is as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, it's a balance.
What frustrates you about the industry?
It frustrated me a lot during the beginning of my career, not quite as much now because people are cottoning on to it a bit more, but I had a business background, right? So I looked at everything through a business-led and a customer-led perspective, what Eli Schwartz calls product-led SEO. That was always my default setting because I had a business background, and there were a lot of people in SEO who came from engineering backgrounds or backgrounds that didn't necessarily have the greater context of the history of marketing and business. So there were a lot of concepts like A/B testing or focus groups or even just customer personas and demographic research that seemed like a revelation to people, and they were making this big hoopla out of. I'm like, and they were doing that in the 1940s. Like, this is not new. So I think to me that was a frustration at the beginning, where there was that disconnect between what you would be looking at if you were looking at it from a business perspective and from a traditional marketing perspective versus SEO and all of this kind of relatively childish jargon, and then some weird name for something that we've been doing for literally 100 years comes out, and it's like we've been doing this for a long time. So I think that was one of my biggest frustrations personally.
Yeah, it's I think that's a side effect of SEOs getting into marketing via non-marketing route. So when they discover something within that they hadn't thought of before, it seems very obvious and new to them, but it's been around for a very, very long time. It makes me laugh sometimes when I come across those stuff. SEOs, we sometimes forget that we're within the umbrella of marketing, right? In fact, advertising, within the umbrella of advertising. So we tend to not branch out and learn more about more traditional advertising things that we can benefit from knowing. Totally agree.
Absolutely.
What would you say frustrates clients about SEO?
It's a combination of the expectations of timeframes, and also I think that they don't necessarily realize upfront how much work on their end it's going to take. So it is one of those things where it's kind of just misattribution of effort, where they think they can hire an SEO and the SEO will be able to do everything. And it's like, no, I'm going to have to be locked in a room with your developer to fix some of these things. Like, it's going to take as much of their time as it is of mine. I think that's something that's getting better. But I think that is probably one of the biggest frustrations that clients probably have. And then also, when kind of what we tell them in terms of expectations of results doesn't necessarily happen because of one of 200,000 variables that Google has decided to shift or change in that time period.
Yeah, totally agree. Especially with the realization of what it will take to have SEO be a success for them. Because they almost sort of like look at the SEO as the person who's going to take care of everything. They don't see it as, actually, that's just the beginning of quite a lengthy journey. But as you indicated, it's something that's improving. The more clients know, the more non-SEOs know about SEO, the better. And it's just a matter of having improving their awareness of SEO, not so they can do SEO, but just so they are more aware of it. So they understand how developers, copywriters, PR affects SEO performance. Amanda, what are you looking forward to this year? Either business or personal goals?
So what I'm looking forward to this year is, continuing to nerd out with clients and figure out puzzles and get stuff done. And then I'm also planning on seeing my family back in the States for a couple of months this year, which will be really nice. Try and avoid winter altogether, which would be fantastic. One thing that I'm not looking forward to, which I'm going to steal from Jamie Indigo, because I was talking to her on my own podcast not that long ago. But I think 2023 is going to be the year where Google kind of clamps down on indexation and takes the helpful content update a bit further and is like, okay, this is what we think is duplicate content, or what we perceive as duplicate content. This is unnecessary. We're not going to waste money crawling it.
Wow.
I think that's going to happen in the next, if not this year, then in the next 2 to 3 years.
That will definitely be an approach to have marketers shape up with their content.
Tighten everything, yeah.
Yeah, that would be awesome. Amanda, thank you so much for your time. Where can people find you online?
Thank you. So the best place to probably catch me is on LinkedIn. You can find me at Amanda King. I think my handle is Amanda EC King, which is also my Twitter handle, which I'm on less regularly, and then Instagram as well, same handle. I'm happy to share those with you if you wanted to add it to the post or whatever.
Yes, please.
But yeah, that Amanda EC King, that's where you can find me generally on the internet.
And what is your, you mentioned your podcast. Where can people find that? And what is the name of it?
So that is yet to be published. I need to sit down and edit that. But when I do, I'll be sharing it on my LinkedIn.
Right.
It's called Engage on Enterprise SEO, because I'm a Star Trek nerd.
I'm more of a Star Wars guy person than Star Trek, but they're in the same sort of like area, I guess. They're close enough. Amanda, thank you so much for your time. You have a brilliant evening.
Thank you.
We'll catch up again soon.